got to a place where my worth got wrapped up in my work. So if I wasn't working, I wasn't worthy. And so when you get those two kind of tied in together, when you stop working, you feel like it is taking something away from you. You feel like you are losing something in the process of resting. And if rest feels like a punishment, you're not going to push into it. You're not going to try to incorporate it in your life. You're going to run from it, which is what I did for many years, and which is what a lot of us do.
You're listening to episode 48 of the Happy Space podcast, and today we're exploring why real rest is about more than a good night's sleep with well-being advocate Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. Hi, I'm Clare Kumar, your proudly neuroatypical host, exploring the intersection of productivity and inclusivity. I believe that everyone ought to be able to make their richest contribution, but too often people are excluded from spaces, cultures, and experiences. We can do better. I hope that you find inspiration and encouragement in these conversations, for everyone deserves a happy space. The purpose of rest is to give you opportunities to taste the life you've created. This is a phrase from Sacred Rest by today's guest, Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. And it's in line with the dedication of the book to her sons. May you never become so busy you neglect to enjoy the life you create. Dr. Saundra definitely writes grounded in her Christian faith, but no matter your faith, you'll find loving wisdom within its pages and in this episode, and an invitation to explore your relationship to faith itself. I work with many clients suffering from the overwhelm of an overly scripted life. Sleep is often sacrificed, but it is not the only requirement for a well-rested life. Dr. Saundra in the book takes us through 7 forms of rest with a loving hand, offering ways to detect which kinds of rest we need and practical ways to replenish. She closes with her perspective on the gifts that come along with claiming a well-rested life. Dr. Saundra was a family physician for 20 years, and for the past 5 runs a company that brings well-being, health and well-being to organizations, running retreats and sharing her wisdom from the stage. Thank you so much for making time to listen to this episode. I'd love to hear what resonates with you and what you might be choosing to differently. Dr. Saundra credits an unknown mama with saying, "Find the place your soul longs to rest and dwell there. For it is there you will find the secret of living well." And that's my wish for you. Please enjoy this episode. Dr. Saundra, I am so happy to be back spending time with you. Thanks so much for joining.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
You know, we spoke last time, and in between that time, I got to finish your book while I was lying on the beaches of Colombia. It was a really, intentional rest moment for me, and almost no better time to really absorb this book. And having spoken to you beforehand, I could hear you in my head, and it just brought the book to life in a different way. So I wanted to thank you for making the time to speak some weeks ago now, and just the warmth with which you write the book. I feel like you've written other books before, and maybe this was the tone of those books as well, but I'm curious, you brought a lot of empathy and self-compassion into this book. How important is that in the conversation about rest?
I think it's vital. I think it's very hard to rest if you don't see yourself as someone who's worthy of being taken care of and worthy of that time of self-care. So yeah, I think it's a big part of the equation.
Yeah, I do too. I want to just highlight one part that I just fell in love with. This is the secrets of the well-rested. And I had a dream last night in which I don't know what happened, but I was inside. People were outside and there was water. People were doing stuff with water outside, but I decided I was going to shower inside in the living room with the hose.
Okay.
Made no sense. But of course, all of a sudden there were 4 inches of water on the floor in the living room. And then downstairs in the basement, there was a flood. It was one of these dreams where I'm like, I think it might be trying to tell me something. So I wanted to read just a couple of words. Number 1, Don't bend your life to fit into a space too small for your personal needs. You may break in the process. And number two, more is only better if you already have a system for releasing the overflow. And when I reflected on that dream last night, I thought, uh-oh, I think I may be inviting too many demands, and I need to pause and take a look at that. Those are the two. There's more secrets of the well-rested, which I thought that page, everybody needs to have that on their wall. It's gold. What are you noticing are the big challenges? How did those bubble up to be the top two secrets of the well-rested, for example?
Well, personally, the entire book came out of my own burnout journey. So a lot of times people will say, wow, it's like you really understand it. It's like, yeah, unfortunately, I do. I lived a lot of years in this a state of burnout because I thought that was just what I was supposed to feel like until I got to the place where I did break. And I think that's part of the process. Once I started that journey of self-discovery is what some people call it, awakening, what other people call it. I call it survival at the moment. When I started that journey of survival, just trying to figure out how do I survive a very demanding profession and not leave it, but how can I move from surviving it, which was the first goal that I had, to actually thriving in it.
Mhm.
And for myself, that was kind of some of those steps that came along the way, and looking at those kind of what it looks like to be well rested. The first couple of times when I started really experiencing rest, it was very difficult for me to not make some major changes in my life because I immediately knew what I was feeling wasn't right. It's
Mm,
like for all those years, I'm like, everybody's tired. Everybody, you know, says they're busy. Everybody's not sleeping well.
yeah.
And it's like, yeah, everybody is, but is that right? I don't think I ever dawned on me that it was something to push back against.
Mhm.
And so I think that's really kind of where a lot of those first two particularly came from, is just that bit of kind of recognizing that, yeah, we all want more, but do we have space for more? What are we going to do when the more hits our lives? Are we going to just feel the pressure of it?
Yeah.
Or do we have a way and a system in place to release it and to even know what we're willing to release? That's a question a lot of people struggle with, that indecision about what to keep, what to release. So it was all of those things that started to kind of pop up after I started experiencing rest. And I was like, you know what? These are the secrets that we don't talk about. These are the things we don't share with each other. And we assume people just understand it. But most of us, not only do we not understand it, it's not even a conversation we've ever thought to have with ourselves or with anyone else.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And so first is a question about the overall culture that we're in and the fact that we talk about hustle, we talk about grit, we talk about pushing through, we talk about sleep when you're dead, that kind of
Hmm.
that thinking. How much does that play in, as well as the cultures? Like you're a family physician.
Hmm.
And so my experience with the medical world, my dad was a surgeon. I don't think it was designed for well-being. The construct of the system that we're in often is counter to humanity and well-being. What are your thoughts on how we push back and how we claim what we need in that context?
Yeah, our culture definitely doesn't lend itself towards any type of well-rested lifestyle or self-care for that standpoint. Particularly as you mentioned, medicine definitely it trains you
Mm,
actually the exact opposite in residency and medical school. So I feel like our culture for those who want to live a well-rested life, those who are recognizing the dysfunction of our current work rest ratio imbalances,
yeah.
it's hard in a way because there has to be a level of kind of courage and boldness to stand up against a system that is actually promoting the exact opposite. However, in the promotion of the exact opposite, it's seeing the continued dysfunction of it without any thought process on how to correct it. So I find that it's really interesting that most of the work actually that I do now, as you mentioned, I spent 20 years in clinical practice in internal medicine, and now I actually run a workplace well-being consulting agency for the past 5 years. When I look at that now, what I'm seeing is most of the places that invite me in are corporations or hospitals or universities where the dysfunction has overcome them. So, for example, I'll get invited to a hospital where they've had 2 or 3 suicides that have happened in the past year. And now they're like, you know what? People may be overwhelmed. We may need to address this. Or I get invited into a corporation where there's been a merger or an acquisition and everybody's stressed and people are leaving in droves because of the stress and the anxiety, and it's like,
Mhm.
oh, we need to address this. We now need the soft skill of change management and burnout prevention and emotional resilience. And the reality is they needed the tools before the thing hit, before the stress,
Yeah.
before the pressure, before the
Yeah.
change. They needed the toolbox of those rest strategies, those restorative practices before any of that happened.
Yeah.
But we tend to be, just like in medicine, more of a retroactive society than a proactive society. And it keeps us in dysfunction because we do not get on top of the things that are needed to actually keep us healthy.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I wonder what you think, we have a tolerance for human casualties in this process, right? Before we're
Yeah.
willing to say, to look at it. I think in Japan, they have the term karoshi, which is death by overwork, right? We probably need a word in North America as well. For that same kind of thing, right? It's not somebody necessarily. I remember reading about somebody who jumped off the roof of their building
Hmm.
because they just couldn't take their life anymore. And so, I mean, I think many of us run into our own walls and they look different. What did your burnout look like? And what are you seeing in people now that they should take a pause and be more mindful and notice to say, wait, I need to do something about this now.
Yeah, when I burned out, most people from the outside looking in would have said I had a perfect life. As far as looking at it and not living in it. So for myself, when I burned out, it was at the height of my career. I was part of a large physician medical group, the largest in our area. I was partner. I had books already out. I had the 2 kids, the house, the car, the man, all, great vacations, all the frills of success. And I remember coming home one day after picking up the kids at daycare, and I remember getting home and setting them up as the first chapter of the book, setting them up on the sofa and just kind of needing a moment to myself. And I it was one of those moments where I was so exhausted. I just laid out on the floor and I'm looking up at this chandelier actually in my foyer of this gigantic house. And I'm laying there and I'm thinking, how did I get here?
Mm.
And I didn't mean like, how did I get here in this house? It's like, how did I get here where I have, as a type A personality, high achiever, have checked off everything that I said I wanted, and I am anything but happy?
Today's episode of the Happy Space podcast is sponsored by ClareKumar.com. With sensitivity, curiosity, and courage, I serve 3 groups asking the tough questions that lead to meaningful answers. Number 1, I coach ambitious leaders to design for well-being and achieve next-level work-life integration. Number 2, I mic drop thought bombs. That's bombs as in BALMS, in keynotes and workshops, helping organizations achieve the business imperative that is inclusivity. And 3, I collaborate with brands concerned with respect for well-being on product design, marketing, and PR. If any of this piqued your interest, come find me at clarekumar.com. I'd love to speak with you. Designing inclusive performance together will lead to the richest results.
And it was one of those situations where it's like I didn't feel suicidal necessarily or anything like that, but I felt like my life didn't require me to be living. It was just existing, and I just happened to be in the place that I happened to be in. And I think it was that moment that I realized that I went beyond just being overworked to being at a place where I no longer cared, period, about anything. And I had to really kind of start getting back to that place of seeing myself as someone who needed to be aware of what my own needs were, needed to be aware of where the deficits were that were leaving me feeling so empty, because that was the only word that it actually made sense. I was just depleted. I was just empty. all fronts. And, I think for myself, one of the things that I talk about this in the book is my son. I'm a science geek, and so I love biology and all of that stuff. And so my son had a project one day in school where they were studying bees. And it was during the time when I was researching rest and doing these other things. And one of the things that really just came to mind was, the honeybee is constantly producing honey, sweetness, goodness for other people to enjoy. But you rarely ever hear about the honeybee ever actually eating the honey for itself. So it's producing all this honey, but it never actually stops to enjoy the sweetness that it produces.
Mhm.
And I remember one day when we were doing the little research project he had, I remember sitting back and looking at my life and just thinking, I'm that bee. I have so many people telling me how blessed they are by me being their physician, or how what a great job I did on this project or that project. And I actually have not stopped to enjoy the life I've actually created. I'm just busy producing with no time to actually enjoy it. And that's when I started to make a change. And I think a lot of people are living that. They're producing these beautiful lives, and they haven't stopped long enough to actually enjoy the life they're producing.
I think that's the most profound, beautiful sentiment and invitation all wrapped into one. And do you think that's, how do you think we get to that place where the expectation is that we just need to be doing so much that we don't deserve to enjoy? Like, how does that come about?
I often say for myself, I got to a place where my worth got wrapped up in my work. So
Mm,
if I wasn't working, I wasn't worthy. And so when you get those two kind of tied in together,
mhm.
when you stop working, you feel like it is taking something away from you. You feel like you are losing something in the process of resting. And if rest feels like a punishment, you're not going to push into it. You're not going to try to incorporate it in your life. You're going to run from it, which is what I did for many years, and which is what a lot of us do. If you've ever grown up, and this is probably what half the population grown up with any kind of trauma in your childhood, you probably are running from rest because a part of you have has built up your mindset that if it's to be, it's up to me. And that means I've got to always be doing so I can be producing. And you never get to the point where you realize that although that is true to some degree, you do have to do work, but there also has to be time where you replenish so that you can continue working and not get to the place where your work becomes depleted because you don't actually have capacity anymore.
Yeah, that's right. It made me think as well, though, when I was a child, go to your room was sort of a punishment rather than an invitation to rest. It was like, you must go to, but there was a real tug of war. And maybe as a curious child, I wanted to stay up and always get the last juice out of the day kind of thing. So there was a bit of tug of war around the concept of rest and resistance to it, even as a child. Yeah. Um, right off the bat, you reframe sleep as not the foundation of rest, but as the byproduct of rest. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think a lot of us recognize sleep's important. So sometimes I get the question, so you don't think sleep's important? No, I think sleep is vital. Well, you can't live without sleep. So sleep is definitely important, but I think we don't fully recognize how rest and sleep relate to each other. They're not the same thing. They should not be used interchangeably because sleep really falls under the physical rest component. And my work is based around there being seven different components, not just the physical. And so when we look at sleep and we just look at it completely separate from the concept of rest, you have to realize that some of the types of rest deficit will actually worsen your ability to sleep. So, like sensory rest deficits can work, and that's documented in many forms. It's why they tell you not to use your gadgets right before you go to bed and turn down some of the lights on your phones and all these other things before going to bed because we know it can interrupt your sleep cycle. And so you have that. And then if you have an achy, tight, tense body, it's hard for your body to go to sleep if your legs are cramping or your back's hurting. And mental rest deficits is another huge one. How many times have a lot of us been exhausted and we lay our head on the pillow only to have every thought we could ever think and every idea that could pop into our brain
Mhm.
come right at the moment when you're trying to sleep. And it prevents you from going into those deeper levels of non-REM sleep. All of those are rest deficits. And so when any of those types of things happen, it impedes upon our ability to get high quality sleep. So oftentimes we have people going to bed 6, 7, 8 hours, but the quality of their sleep is not good. They may have quantity with no quality,
Mm.
and that's not beneficial either. We want to have high quality sleep at an appropriate quantity that actually helps our body stays feeling restored.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we're noticing an improved awareness because of all the body tracking devices that are happening now, the watches, and
Hmm.
there's even a phone app you could put on beside your pillow to test the movement on the mattress. There's lots of ways now. Do you notice that now as being something where there's a rising awareness of at least the sleep portion, if not the other different kinds of rest as well?
Yeah, we've been contacted by quite a few of the different sleep app companies. Um, I won't mention names because I don't know where all of that's going, but
Mhm.
some have mentioned because quite a few of them have sleep. Not only do they have sleep, but they have recovery scores. They have,
Mhm.
your readiness scores. There's a lot of different scores that
Yeah.
are coming out now based off of some of the sleep data. And so having the ability to help people not only recognize that there's a problem, because that's really what a lot of those things are showing you. They show you if there's an area of decline or an area that needs improvement, but
Yeah.
then also giving people some specific guidelines on what they can actually do to improve their, let's say, recovery score, readiness scores, to be able to get back at whatever the activity is that they're trying to do, whether that's a if you're an athlete, it's a whether it's a physical activity or just your day-to-day work life,
Yeah.
being able to make sure that you are equipped for that.
Yeah, it was just this morning I saw a friend of mine post, "What does body battery mean?" And it was from her watch. And she's like, "I don't know what
Hmm.
this means, but it's only 54%. That can't be good. What does it mean?" And so I think it was a sense, somebody answered, it was a sense of this is how much how recovered you are. And
Hmm.
that would be alarming to me. That would tell me I need to do something. I'm curious what the app guides her to do. And my guess is
It doesn't most of the time.
well, that's what I was going to say. I'm guessing it doesn't touch on the breadth of thought that you've put into place over the 7 types of rest. Um, I loved exploring what each of those was. The mental rest or to quiet the noise in the brain, and I find I get tired. I when I give workshops, I talk about having a stop thinking break, just to give everybody a break from listening. I don't know about you, but when you're doing your sessions, I don't know if you do any full days, but I don't think the humans are designed for full days, 8 hour workshops. I don't do them anymore. I do pretty much a half day at most. What is your thought on how we're seeing some of this awareness and your awareness infuse how you design what you engage in and offer out now?
Yeah, so I agree. I believe people have to have moments of experiencing what rest looks like.
Mm,
And so we do quite a few retreats, whether they're executive retreats or if they are personalized retreats or couples retreats. We do quite a few retreats. And most of the time when we do, like, let's say an executive retreat, I do recommend that they be no more than 6 hours at a time. And even when I'm doing them like that, like we do, that's our full day is 6 hours, three and
yes.
three. But
Yes.
even when we do that with corporations or with companies or CEOs, we tend to, it's not all talking. There's a huge part of the actual practice of the restorative practices in the middle of that. And so what I find is most of the time, because people are not familiar with how they can actually do some of these different types of rest in the middle of their workday, then that actually showing them how to do it, sitting at a conference table or wherever we happen to be having the retreat at, is helpful for them to be able to see, wow, you really can get this type of rest in the middle of your day, surrounded by your colleagues,
Yeah.
and not feel, weird or like we're doing something strange or something. And so that's how we do it within like a corporate type setting. When we're doing it like with a 2 or 3 day retreat, when we're going, we're going to some place and we're doing it that way, I always try to set it up so that we're not spending more than a couple of hours in the morning and a couple in the evening, maybe one at the most, 1 to 2 at
Mhm.
the most in any type of actual verbal training.
Mhm.
And it's giving people some ideas of rest practices for each of the 7 types. So the morning might be devoted to mental rest, and we'll get some ideas of things that they can do. And then we set it up so that they can choose what actually works with their personality.
Mhm.
Because what is so unique about the different types of rest deficits is that how you restore can be completely different than somebody else. And so it's helpful when, especially on a long form retreat, like the 3 days, 2 nights kind of thing, you
Yeah.
can help people see all the possibilities. So if
Yeah.
they try something one day and it's like, well, I felt okay, but I don't know if that really made me feel that much better. They can try something completely different. Or I'll give you a quick example. Like some people get emotional rest by talking, like counselors, therapists, like talking to someone like that.
Yeah.
And then we have these other people that when they're like, oh, I don't journal, I don't like journaling. And then when we give them specific prompts, they're like, wow, that really felt good to get that off my chest. But if you ask them, they're like, I don't like journaling. And it's like, well, you don't like it the way that you kind of framed it in your mind about what it had
Mhm.
to look like.
Mhm.
But when the limits are taken off of it and you're given freedom to express and whatever's authentic to you,
Yeah.
now you can see that it's actually a way that you could get emotional rest.
So powerful. Yeah. We'll definitely have to put a link in the show notes so people can find opportunities to check out these retreats with you because I'm already wanting to sign up. It sounds like so much of what's needed. Just focusing on mental rest for a second, one of the things I've been thinking about is that our cognitive load has just increased exponentially in the last few years as more has become digital. I don't know whether I'm supposed to go to a website. I was dealing with my car insurance this morning and I wanted to find out what did I sign up for with my car insurance. I know I have a base rate and then a price per 1,000 kilometers. But I didn't know where my base rate was. I'm like, you know what? I don't even think I got a policy. Did I get one in the mail? Did it come in an email? Is it in the app they sent me that tracks my mileage? I didn't even know how to orient with this. 15 minutes of restarting passwords, phone call with them. It took me about 25 minutes to get the answer of how much am I paying for car insurance? And I thought, this is kooky because it's just, we have so many different digital environments. We used to have very analog, concrete, it's people, it's paper, maybe abstract was the phone. Now, so much, the percentage that's become abstract, I think is, I'm trying to formulate a more succinct question. The percentage of our life that is now abstract is greater. And I think the cognitive load is more demanding. Do you sense that that's part of what's creating the mental exhaustion?
I do. I think we are over processing is where we're at in most of our minds. We are constantly processing information. And so the processing of that information keeps us always thinking about stuff. We have a hard time being focused on any one thing. Concentration, focus, clarity, all of those things seem like a dream sometimes in certain situations because we are so used to kind of thinking broadly rather than thinking narrowly. With mental rest deficits, a big part of that is the mindfulness practices and seeing how to incorporate mindfulness, meditation, those types of practices back into your life in a way that fits you and your personality so that you can practice clearing space in your mind. Even things like recognizing the amount of multitasking that you do and downgrading as much of it as possible, recognizing, whether or not you are being 100% attentive at times. I put it to you like this: when I'm at one of my son's soccer games and I see, the game is going on. It's not like, it's not like a halftime or a break or
Mhm.
something. It's the game is going on and parents have taken the time to show up at the game and they are fully engrossed in their phone.
Yeah.
It's like they have to check with everybody else to see if that really was a goal because they
Mm.
didn't see it. They actually, their eyes are nowhere near the
Yeah,
field to even know what's going on. And I feel like when every aspect of our life has these distractors
yeah.
that are pulling our attention away and not keeping us where we can actually focus on things, it's just more information we're processing. And our brain doesn't really get opportunities to downgrade some of that and just focus deeply.
Mm. Yeah, you talk about having a sanctuary, creating your own mental sanctuary as a place to go for rest. I thought that was a very powerful and practical tip as well. I know I'm also finding the world less intuitive. So there's more struggle just to say, like looking at a self-checkout. I don't, it's not intuitive in me. It took me 5 to 10 minutes to realize there was a little blue sign up that said, credit card only. And I was like, where's the cash piece? Where's like, just like put in all the stuff, went to ring it through and, oh, I have cash. I feel like the world is less for me. And as a highly sensitive person, and I know you're highly sensitive too, do you think, maybe we can talk about sensory rest in that particular piece with respect to your burnout and the burnout for people who do have sensory challenge, and I think that's anyone who's neurodivergent, period, that through line is there. What are you noticing about the increased stimulation in the world? I'll say LED light pollution, modified exhausts. There's a lot of toxic wavelengths in the world now. What are you noticing as a sensitive person and the challenge that brings?
Well, I think it requires you to really be aware of what agitates you, what actually leads to increased symptoms of a rest deficit or a sensory rest deficit, to be specific. I
Mm.
know generally when people have a sensory rest over deficit or they have sensory overload, they tend to have more irritation, agitation, rage, or anger. And so I'm always looking at what makes me feel anxious or agitated or what makes me feel uncomfortable. And I'm always trying to also be proactive in certain situations. I spend a whole lot of time on planes and in conference centers and places where there's just a lot of background noise. And so, as an HSP, I realized that the plane's not going to get more silent. I have to make it a sanctuary, which means I bring noise cancellation earphones on and I put them on when it's revving up and it's revving down so that I don't have to hear that. I know that if I'm going to go speak at an event and it's going to be one of those events where there's a lot of like background noise, people talking to people in chairs and that hum when
Yeah.
you're in a conference, I know that I'm not going to schedule my speaking event and stuff the entire day. I'm going to block off a couple of hours in different periods, especially if there's like a networking event that I have to go to after I speak. I'm going to take as much time between me speaking and the networking event to get all of my senses back in equilibrium because I realize I'm not going to show up at that event to network at the best version of myself if I'm on edge. If I'm agitated, I'm going to be withdrawn. I'm
Yeah.
not going to be personable. It's not going to go well. So, being aware of that,
Yeah.
then I create the opportunity for me to get the sensory rest that I need. And I basically, in a hotel room, I shut all the windows, lay on the bed with my eyes closed and nothing playing. And I just kind of, I'm not asleep. I'm just shutting down as much of the sensory input as I can to just let my body regroup.
Yeah. I tried to go to NSA Influence a year and a half ago in Nashville, and it was at the Gaylord big hotel there,
Hmm.
or Waterfalls.
I
Drove
was just there.
Were you just there? So I drove
Yes.
14
Hmm.
hours to go to that conference. We stayed one night and I said, we have to leave. There was no, like, even every hotel room, maybe you found a better room, but we tried 3 bedrooms and none of them were free of noise
No.
with the doors closed. It was, even then I went swimming and I thought, oh, I can go swimming. That'll be great. They had piped music in the water. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. What's going on with this lack of comprehension that humans need pockets of peace. Like it, and I think the banner's there. This is the summer of more. And I thought, oh God, this is so not for me. Like, what's going on with that lack of awareness?
I think most people are more comfortable with noise in general.
Mm.
I think for the most part, especially in the sense of, as you mentioned, it's a gigantic hotel. The hotel is basically like an amusement park or a mall.
Yeah,
It's not very hotel-y. It's not your standard hotel. It's
that's
a
right.
mega event, right?
Yeah.
So I think for when most of the places like that, it is all about more lights, more sounds, more activity, more noise, more fun. And so it isn't really conducive to sleep or rest or any of those things while you're there. And I find that that's oftentimes the case when people plan even events. If there's any event planners that are listening, one of the things I hear often when I work with the when I go to an event, I require actually a meeting with every event planner, whether they want it or not. I require it specifically because I always want to know how they put the schedule together, because I find that sometimes in their desire to get as much information in there as possible, they pack a schedule so completely that it ruins the opportunity for their attendees to actually leave there changed and transformed.
Hmm.
Transformation, information processing, reflection, all of that requires some white space.
Hmm.
And so helping them kind of evaluate that and see how they can actually weave some of that in there, and then hearing their feedback afterwards when they said it was the best event ever. They got to meet more people. Social rest. How
Right.
many times have you gone to an event where all your peers are there and you're all sitting there staring at another speaker, not talking to each other?
Yeah.
That's horrific.
Well,
And
I've
so,
yeah, gone to
you know,
conferences and we've just ditched the sessions to have social connection. But if
and
it's
then you miss the
blended,
session
yeah, you
altogether.
miss the
Right.
session, then you think, why did I pay for this? Exactly.
So helping them actually understand that and see how to weave it together. That's one of the things I love doing, because sometimes the they want me to come and talk about the 7 types of rest, right? So I'm like, sure. I'm like, okay, well, I'll come. And they're like, talk for 60 minutes. I'm like, well, no. How about if I talk for 30 minutes
Yeah.
and then I lead them through an emotional social rest activity
Yeah.
for 30 minutes, so that your attendees actually make one or two friends right there in the opening session.
Mhm.
And they're like, what? That can happen? I'm like, of course it can happen. It's your event. You can make
Yeah.
whatever happen you want to happen. So it's
Yes.
one of those things where I think sometimes we just have to help people think outside of the box on what's possible
Yeah.
and what can actually be beneficial and get the result that they want.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. There's a shared values conversation to be had there, and then an opening of possibility. I love
Hmm.
that. I want to touch on spirituality because it's been a question for me. What's my relationship to spirituality? How do I talk about it? You've written books about Christian faith before, and that's the lens and probably half of the focus of Sacred Rest.
Hmm.
And you offer up a question. What if spirituality is not about learning about religion, but rather about experiencing a relationship that you might be keeping safely tucked behind the walls of religion? And I thought, oh, I loved the question. And I thought for her listeners who or might be like me and saying, well, I don't understand my connection to this. Could you help expand on that a little bit?
Yes, yes, I love that question, because I think because I write the book from my faith as a Christian, some people think that it won't relate to them.
Mhm.
The 7 types of rest, the first half of the book relates to anybody. It's based off of science and research. But I also talk about in the book how for myself, it would have been inauthentic for me not to talk about it from from the truth of kind of where I enter into the picture. But I do realize that many people in the world don't have the same belief. And so with spiritual rest, I wanted to make sure that people recognize that although this is the position I come from in understanding it, that there is a greater need for everybody to understand it, because at the core of spiritual rest is really the need we all have to experience belonging, love, acceptance, compassion, empathy. I mean, they're just core beliefs that are needed within humanity for us to be human to each other. And so
Mhm.
I think that's the area that where each of us can start to evaluate, what does spirituality look like for me? How do I enter into that? Some people experience it through some type of faith-based system, or whatever faith-based system that is that you associate with. Some people have no faith-based system at all, and they experience that belonging, compassion, empathy, love, acceptance through things like associations they're a part of, or volunteerism, or they experience that through compassionate acts that they do. And so it how you engage with it, I leave completely up to you. But I think we have to recognize that for us to feel part of the bigger picture, kind of part of the greater good, it requires a bit of connectivity that goes beyond just the common connectivity. It goes to the things that aren't as tangible. Love is not tangible. Compassion is not tangible. Empathy is not tangible. They're things that are transacted on a different level. You call it whatever level you want to call it, but it's transacted on a different level. And I call all of that spirituality.
That's beautiful. I totally agree with you that we need more of that. And I think what I read into that is you might be shying away from it because you don't identify with a particular faith, but don't
Mhm.
shy away from that conversation. Spend time with it, get curious about it, and figure out how it shows up for you.
Yeah, I think I sat down with lots of people who identify as being atheists with no religious affiliations whatsoever, and especially in the early stages of this book. And one of the things, and that's why I felt so comfortable kind of sharing this at that level, because so many of them, although they were completely against everything that had to do with the religion part of it, still promoted the book because they were from and their standpoint, what the I think the common ground that we came to is that purpose there's purpose in the loving, the accepting, and the belonging, and the empathy, and the compassion. There's a purpose in that that actually helps us to feel whole, that gives us a rest in knowing that our lives are has meaning, that our lives are contributing, and that regardless of what you believe about any faith system, that all of us benefit from that level of personalization that comes when we connect our purpose with the purpose of greater humanity.
That's beautiful. I mean, what do I say to that? That's incredible. I um I loved the seven different kinds of rest and that whole concept of expanding what we believe to be necessary. My invitation for listeners out there is please grab a copy of Sacred Rest and dive into the different kinds. It's written so beautifully and practically. This is what I loved about it too. And I just wanted to give you kudos there because it's very interactive, the book, right? So it takes you through some self-reflection about what are you noticing about yourself? What could this be a rest deficit for you? So there are questions that you can answer. And then it gives you, for every one of them, three different things that you might consider implementing in. So listeners, please check out Sacred Rest and come find Dr. Saundra and I on social media or give us a review. Let us know what you thought about this. I want to give you the final word. And is there anything you'd like to say in this particular moment to listeners who are interested in, having a fulfilling, productive life that really honors who we all are?
Well, I know the one thing most people always ask me is, so there's seven things I have to get now. So I would say to not fear about that, because for the most part, most of us are already exceeding and excelling at quite a few of the seven. There's usually only one or two rest deficits that you either aren't familiar with, or that you aren't being intentional about getting restorative practices in those areas. And we actually have a free assessment at restquiz.com that allows you to be able to determine which of the seven types of rest you're most deficient in. That way you can focus your attention on those areas of greatest deficit and get those areas back up to a healthy place.
I love it. There you go. Restquiz.com. Don't delay. Go and find out what will uplift your life. It's the low-hanging fruit to a better quality, better quality life. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for spending time here. Check out happyspacepod.com for links to all the episodes, including on YouTube, our online community, and helpful tools for work that fits. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment on social media, or even better, drop a review. And please share with someone else who you know also deserves a happy space.